Today on the Dad the Best I Can show.
It's up to us as both leaders and parents to help teach these things that are essential to bringing us to the next level. And what it comes down to are two key elements, which is my platform for everything that I'm doing and why I wrote this book, which is we got to bring more empathy and more connection. And especially as you look at your kids, my kids, the Gen Z that are entering the workforce, which are about 24 all the way through to those being born today, there's an element of connection and that is missing because they aren't flexing that muscle all day, every day, because they have a screen in the middle. Mm-hmm. So how can we act as a catalyst to creating that interpersonal connection and encourage them to be flexing that muscle? And I've rules within my team is like, for example, if you're in the same building as someone, you got to get up. You're not allowed to IM, you're not allowed to text, and you're not allowed to email. Get your ass out of your seat, walk over to them, look eye to eye, and talk to them. And that's my quick tirade on some of that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now that I think it's important that we take action, and that, we also paint a picture that how I sign all my books is the best is yet to come. And we can either choose light or we can choose dark. And it's up to us to help people choose light through connection.
Welcome to the Dad the Best I Can show. My name is Rob Roseman. Who wants to be a millionaire legend, Chicago futures trader, Vegas poker pro. Now I'm a dad to 3 kids, ages 7, 5, and 2. Phew. Wears me out just thinking about it. Each week we bring on high-performing dads like you, entrepreneurs like Jesse Itzler, CEOs like David Cancel from Drift.com, athletes like Ken Rideout, best-selling children's authors like Zach Bush, to tell us your stories, your dad tips and tricks, to help all of us make it through dad life. We have a brand new website over at dadthebestican.com. Go on over to dadthebestican.com and sign up with your email. It's 100% free, of course. Be the first to hear brand new dad guests and get weekly dad tips in your inbox. Okay, enough out of me. On to today's show. All right, welcome to the Dad the Best I Can show. Today we are joined by Chris Tuff. Chris is a partner at the ad agency 22 Squared. He is the author of the best-selling book, The Millennial Whisperer, the world's largest and most misunderstood generation. That's not a Millennial Whisperer. I thought that might be a Nick Cage movie, but best-selling book. And of course, he is a dad. Hey, Chris, how's it going today?
What's up? Good. Ready to rock and roll, man.
Where are you calling in from?
Atlanta proud, as you can probably see behind me, Rob, with my all of my paraphernalia for Atlanta.
Represent. I'm only 2 years in here, but this could be the most underrated, awesome city. I used to Chicago up there too, but Chicago, Atlanta, my top 5
for sure. Well, I mean, I'm a huge kiteboarder, as I probably have told you in our quick interactions in the past. But it's so easy to get places from here, which is part of the allure.
Yes, I want to talk Millennial Whisperer because I'm now fascinated by this topic. There's so many cliches and judgments made about millennials, especially in the workplace. So I'm excited to hear you give us some tactics and strategies to deal with them and thrive with them. But First of all, you are a dad. How old are your kids now?
So 7 and 9, almost my 9-year-old's almost 10, 2 daughters, and they rock. Yeah, I mean, it's and it's a big part of my own story is and actually what started my tattoos here, which is kind of spiraled out of control into a full sleeve tattoo, as you can see. But center to everything are kind of what I call my hula hoops, which are Marlon, my 7-year-old, and then this one is Finley, my 9-year-old. The other one's my wife, so that's good.
Yeah, I got to get her on there too.
Totally.
Nice. Yeah, 7 and 9. I think that might be, you're entering the prime best kid ages possible.
Yeah, I mean, I told my wife the other night as we were on a non-frustrating night putting our kids to bed. I think she put on something on Hallmark, which means it's my cue to start working on the couch. And I was like, you know what? I wish we could just bottle this up. Like, it's such a fun age. It's such a It's and I mean, they crack me up. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, you grind through those early years. I got 7, 5, and 2, so I'm still in it a little bit, but you even see just to have the conversations and, like you said, their sense of humor. It's incredible at that age.
Totally. It was funny. I ran into a guy. I was getting my car fixed because, being in Atlanta, your car gets hit a lot. And the guy working on my car was like, yeah, man, I got a, I got a 2-year-old and a 5-week-old at home. And I was like, dude, here's the one thing that no one ever told me about being a dad is that it's okay to not like them until they're like 4. And I know for my 7-year-old, it took quite a bit of time for us to develop a relationship. Um, but I was like, dude, I'm telling you, they're 7 and 9. It is such a prime age and loving it.
I mean,
So
that's important too, because I think it's like liberating guys, especially. We don't talk about that stuff and we think we're supposed to be loving it. I'm sure moms have their moments too, but it does take us a little longer. And yeah, I always feel better when people tell me that they're going through the shit sometimes too.
totally. When I think I spent so much of, especially my younger years as a father, wishing the times away. It was like, when they're not a baby and they're a toddler and then they're a toddler and you're waiting for them to be in, grade school. I spent so much of my time wishing the stage that we were in away. And what's amazing about the human, whatever it is, the human element is you look back on any one of those stages with, whether it be on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and you immediately go back to all of the awesomeness, right? You're like, oh, what I would do to go back. Whereas in reality, you would have an absolute heart attack if you went back to those crying stages. But one thing I'll talk about in my podcast, one thing I do to try to take in and capture the moments more is I actually timestamp my life scents and actually candles. And every night, so I go through tons of candles and spend way too much money on them. But I timestamp my life with candles, music, and books. And so every night for 1 hour, I read. And it's usually just novels, actually, even though I wrote a nonfiction book. But I'll light the candle and then I'll actually timestamp my life with that candle, and I'll save the last little bit, which I'll actually go and put somewhere, and then I'll light it again in the future, and it immediately brings you back to that piece of music and whatever book you're reading at the time. And I think there's a human element of that where, even writing this book was very difficult at times. Not so much the process of writing the book, but a lot of the things, it's a lot like being a parent. You go through these really difficult places where it's hard, and sometimes you say, or as a father, I know that for my kid, there's an undistinguished line that we try to help them either push through or we kind of protect them from, right? And I use 2 examples. One, when my 9-year-old was playing on a soccer team, and my wife was a professional soccer player, so that she was kind of expected to perform on the field to a certain extent. She didn't like it that much and isn't playing anymore, but this is about a year ago. And she starts crying when her coach told her that she had to move from being defense to offense. And she turns to me, she goes, Daddy, I don't want to play offense. I'm like, no, get your ass in there. You're playing offense. And within 4 minutes, she scored a goal, and being on offense was her favorite position. That was very different than the panic attacks we were experiencing from her when it was just a really bad fit with the school she was at. And she has ADHD and dyslexia and was just in a really bad fit of a school. And I had to come in, we pulled her out, lost a lot of money, but found an amazing school in Atlanta, the Howard School. We're huge advocates of the Howard School, and all of that weight was lifted. But I use all of that as a long story of, that is the challenge that we're up against as parents, when you come in and protect, and then also as on a personal side. And I know the process of writing that book, I almost pushed myself too far because I put it all on the line. I invested a ton of money, obviously, went through, some of those periods where I bounced checks for the first time since I was 27, but through the process of lighting that candle and listening to that music, it was during the lowest point. I turned to my wife with kind of like tears in my eye. And also, I'm juggling with trying to support a family. And I turned to her and I was like, do you think I'll actually have good memories of this? And it was 4 months later that I relit that candle that I had at the time, just 4 months. And I yelled down to my wife, I was like, they're good memories, Julie. They're good memories. So
That's
that's my
awesome.
quick tirade on, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said in that. And, my friend Peter Bolden, who I'm sure he's one of the stories in my book, but runs Atlanta Dental Spa and is in this mastermind with Hank McClarty, myself, Tommy Breedlove. There's 8 of us. We call ourselves, or someone calls us the Great 8. But it's actually through that he says, there's certain parts in your life where you're pulling back the spring, and the further you pull it back, usually but the greater the trajectory, or think of it like as a bow and arrow. And I think there's something big there in both, from an interpersonal, like, within ourselves in a personal level, as well as parents.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff in there, and it is, especially as parents, we're so new to it. We're learning on the fly, and I know you don't that line between picking your kids up when they fall, or do I send go into the school and bring their homework in that they forgot, all of these little things, these little micro decisions, and we don't want to coddle our kids, but at the same time we are protective of them. We want them
Totally.
to succeed. So it's good to hear that it's a constant 2-step forward, 1 step back learning experience.
100%. And I think I I talk a lot, obviously, kind of moving into some of the book stuff, but I talk a lot about how millennials, what my big statement is: millennials aren't the problem, they just expose all the problems. And where I get a lot of these kind of boomer executives that have been reticent to change, is when they actually read the book and they see it through the eyes of their children. And their first response is usually like, hey, Chris, after reading your book, I understand my kids a lot better. And you got some points there. And it's really interesting, though, as you look at the product of the millennial kind of generation, and Gen Z. I mean, some of the elements that I talk about within the book are products of helicopter parents or snowplow parenting, as well as social media, and the fact that participation trophies were a reality. And so, that brings a lot of things up that we can probably talk about, but it's the harsh reality of what we're living in. And now it's up to us as both leaders and parents to help teach these things that are essential to bringing us to the next level. And what it comes down to are 2 key elements, which is my platform for everything that I'm doing and why I wrote this book, which is we got to bring more empathy and more connection. And especially as you look at your kids, my kids, the Gen Z that are entering the workforce, which are about 24 all the way through to those being born today, there's an element of connection and that is missing, because they aren't flexing that muscle all day every day because they have a screen in the middle. So how can we act as a catalyst to creating that interpersonal connection, and encourage them to be flexing that muscle? And I've rules within my team, is like, for example, if you're in the same building as someone, you got to get up. You're not allowed to IM, you're not allowed to text, and you're not allowed to email. Get your ass out of your seat, walk over to them, look eye to eye, and talk to them. And that's my quick tirade on some of that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now that I think it's important that we take action, and that we also paint a picture that how I sign all my books is the best is yet to come. And we can either choose light or we can choose dark. And it's up to us to help people choose light through connection.
Yeah, I like when you're talking about empathy there, especially relating to our kids, because it's almost easier, lazier to just go with these sound bites of, oh, the kids today are so lazy, they don't pick up their heads from their phones. And the reality is like you said, A, they haven't worked that muscle, but B, they are brilliant and awesome. And they're going to be, besides your employees, they're going to be your boss soon. So it's like you're missing out and just being kind of mentally lazy by not really cultivating this relationship with them.
Totally. And what's the first thing we did when we get on this road trip? We throw them our phones with the iPad. And we're partly to blame for that, people. And also we're a product of that. I mean,
Right.
I asked my wife for a phone locker for Christmas. this. Like that's all I asked for. I didn't ask for any kiteboarding gear. I just want a locker that I cannot get my phone out during the hours of 6 and 8, because I know that's the only, and I have to put my watch in there, my Apple Watch too, because that's the only way that I can fully focus on my family and that connection, because these times are fleeting. I see it already happening. And I don't know. There's the world's changing. We're all evolving. It's not getting worse. It's getting better, but we just got to check ourselves a bit.
Yeah, and I totally agree on the phone. I mean, we're as guilty of it as our kids, and we're modeling this behavior for our kids. But and I'm just now learning this. I have to put it away in the other room, and then I don't miss it at all. But if not, I'm phantom checking my pocket, and
Totally.
it's just can't be healthy. I had a near Ayal. He wrote Indistractable, and he had some great tips that it's not always the devices, and it's our own behavior and mental models that we need to improve on. But I do think there is something to the fact that you have a very powerful, very entertaining, very fun device near you all the time, and it's hard to resist that. So
Totally.
I do think we do need to put some boundaries on it. You mentioned Hank. We actually met. You were interviewing, an incredible interview, by the way, with Hank McClarty. I recorded with him already. He's going to be on the show soon, but just an incredible story. And you did a really good job of kind of getting that story out of him and have him talking about, the ups and downs of his life, which is really, I think, what people want to hear, especially entrepreneurs out there. It's tiresome to hear all of the good times. And I think it's much more relatable and authentic, even talking about your book and talking about raising kids, all these things. I'd much rather hear about your struggles. I'm going to trust you more, believe you more, and empathize with you more.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at, statistically speaking, the second most important thing that millennials are looking for out of their leaders, outside of inspirational leadership, is really this element of authenticity. Kind of falls under transparency and autonomy. They all kind of group together. But and that's according to the 2018 Deloitte Millennial Survey, BT dubs. But I think it's a really important point, and why I start my book with my rock bottom. And I had lost sight of what was most important to me, which was, I was hobnobbing all over the world, playing the status game, which, as Naval says, is a zero-sum game. And I was trying to achieve my metric of success, which at the time was beating my brothers. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, Harvard Business School, Columbia Business School kind of thing. I was trying to, beat them at the game of life. And that was my metric of success. And, everything kind of culminated into a rock bottom moment, which lasted about a month. And 22 Squared was amazing to give me a month off to really look within myself. And a few things were really essential to being a catalyst that was really a 1-year gradual change. I think I probably present it as more all of a sudden in the book, but one of the biggest things was changing that metric to impact. So my metric of success is the amount of impact, and it's going to be judged on a daily basis when my head hits the pillow. So how can I actually have impact that's in line with my purpose, which is to inspire and connect? And then how can I double down on being there as a father, as a husband, and around my core family unit? And I made a promise to all of them, that my family, Finley, Marlon, and Julie, that I would do everything in my power to make them my number one priority again. And it was hard. I lost a lot of friends. I mean, I remember one night, I also stopped drinking, which was a huge part of it. And I'm very open. I mean, I love being around people drinking. It's not like I have any problem with it. But for me, it was kind of one of these, it added to my anxiety and ups and downs, and it took me out of flow states and so on. And so it was during that kind of year that I lost a lot of friends. The guys I used to hang out with, I never hung out with anymore because they didn't want to hang out. And I turned to my wife and I was just like, you know what? I'm kind of bored. And it was a friend of mine at the time that said, Chris, boredom's it's just a synonym for serenity. Like, that's called peace, dude. That's called mindfulness. That's called being in the moment. I'm like, oh, so this is what it is. And it was actually through that inspired the book. When, I a big thing for me was actually, helping to birth the exchange, which is um, hoping to create a place where guys didn't have to hit rock bottom in order to seek change in their life. And I was on the executive retreat to that. And, it was kind of an experiment at the time. And there's 14 of us. My friend Tommy Breedlove, who I didn't know at the time, was leading it. And I introduced myself around the fire. My friend Bert Weiss, who's, head of the Bert Show, average age, probably like 44 years old, of the people there. And I introduced myself. I was like, I don't even know what I do anymore. I've kind of lost my friends. But at my work, I've kind of become the Millennial Whisperer. And I sat down after telling my story, and Tommy was like, you better write that book. And Bert was like, yeah, so tell me some of the shit you do. Like, I'm having such a hard time with some of these idiots in the studio or whatever. I'm like, oh, well, I do this, I do that. And they're like, oh my God, Chris, I can't believe you do that stuff. And it was about 2 weeks later, 3 guys called me and they're like, dude, I started doing that shit you were talking about and it works. And I was like, oh, I think I have to write this book. And then the rest is kind of history.
Why do you think there is so much resistance to it, or that quick trigger of, we're judging, and then anything after that, we're not really listening?
Well, one, we've got to stop using millennials or Gen Zers as a synonym for young and inexperienced. Mm-hmm. That's one big thing. And another thing is that usually by the time that we're trying to fix a culture problem, it's too far along. And what I like to talk about a lot is that good culture is just a byproduct of good leadership. And people are surprised when they start reading my book or finish it. They're like, Chris, this is basically a book about leadership. I'm like, exactly. And it's all around basically, how do you create real connection? And why we don't have it today is because it's a lot easier for us as humans, from a human nature standpoint, to keep doing things the same way that we've been doing it. Mm-hmm. And take, for example, like one of the tactics that I talk about, which is so important, is just developing real relationships with your people, because especially the younger generations and Gen Zers, they expect that. They expect real connections with their people. So open up your one-on-ones when you're talking to them to either talk about work or life. 80% of the time, my friend Mike Hibbison, who's an executive at the Home Depot, is actually the example I use in the book. He says 80% of the time, out of his 30 direct reports, they pick to talk about life. And it's through that connection that everything else ends up following. And mm-hmm. So, why aren't we doing it? Well, because we like to do it the same way that our parents did it. Mm-hmm. And, things have changed so quickly. And it's one thing to look at that change in the needs and how they've changed from a leadership standpoint. So once again, inspirational leadership, autonomy, transparency, authenticity, kind of being that core thing. And then another thing from an organizational standpoint, which is the number one thing is money and benefits. That's no different than any other generation. Where it gets different is number 2 is culture, positive work culture. And then 3, work flexibility. Like, we got to allow people, and you look at these newfound pressures as parents, and I call it the Pinterest station of a generation. We have these expectations on ourselves that are absolutely ridiculous. And to juggle those expectations with our work expectations and our personal expectations, it is bound to be a massive disappointment. And so, you look at some of these, all this stuff working together, and it creates an environment where change has got to happen. And once again, this is a two-way conversation. Like, you look at that Pinterest station, I talk about, as a parent, my daughter's second birthday, my wife hands me the iPad. And this was obviously a few years ago. And she was like, so this is what I'm thinking for later tonight. I got the balloons over there. I got this, blah, blah, blah. And it was a pin of this big contraption of saran wrap that surrounded her door, that in the morning when she opened it up, like 100 balloons would go in. And I was like, two balloons, right? Or I use in speeches the example of the first day of school, and you got these perfect pictures with, Madeline's first day of school and her teacher and her favorite. It's just, it's fucking exhausting, people. And that's a two-way street. One, how do we let go a little bit of some of those tensions and some of these, living the perfect life within our feeds and posting the perfect life. But the other side is also true, where what I call the grass is always greener complex, which is we always expect that there's a perfect job out there or a perfect wife, or we see these perfect fathers. And the reality is there's no such thing. So we got to let go of a lot of that. And what then translates into my 70-30 rule, which is 70% of life and your job and everything should fire you up. And 30% of it's just going to suck. 30% of parenting, at least 30% of parenting, 30% of your job is going to suck. So buckle up and use that 70% to fuel you through those low points. But it's something that as leaders, and especially for the Xers and even older millennials out there with teams, take people's job descriptions and figure out what's in the 70% and what's in the 30%. And what happens is they stop leaving to try to find that perfect 100% in their minds. And as they're working through these things, it's like, oh shit, like this is in my 30%. Like for me, anything Excel and math oriented, I'm like, oh, I just got to work through this 30% to get to that 70. And so you've got all this stuff happening out there, which is essentially what made me pull the trigger on not only writing the book, but also kind of going all in on it.
Yeah, and it's one thing to know this intellectually that the grass is always greener. My friend's not actually in Hawaii with his smiling kids every day, and especially in your business, you're on social media a lot, you're producing content, you're working with teams, you're working with your family, and you are putting it out there. How do you balance and stay mindful, even though you know deep down this isn't real? How do you stay sane with social media and work and family and all that?
Well, I mean, I think accountability partners are so essential to that. And I think you need a couple accountability partners. Your first accountability partner needs to be your spouse. And if that's not working, then you got to start there. I think, and my wife and I have a very healthy, open kind of communication for our, and she's much more of a private person. I am, as you can probably tell, not. Um, so making sure that she kind of acts as that and I act as that for her. But also the same is true for your group of guys that you connect with that can call you out, that can remind you also where you need to be working on some of your weaknesses, or if you're going overboard on certain elements in your life. And for me, that's our grade 8. It's Hank, it's Tommy, it's Mark Hodelick. It's the group of us that every month we have dinner and we do our check-ins and we give a score to our personal life, our family life, and our professional life. And it's through those check-ins that you have that accountability, but also that that source of where you can actually make a commitment and then check in throughout that month to hold you to that. And it changes everything. Like I was just texting with my buddy Quincy Jones, and he's at the gym with Peter Bolden right now. And he's done 5 days in a row at the gym, which is the first time since like college he's done that. And so I think that accountability piece is so important.
And you said that group, which is interesting, and this is something I think about a lot, and I'm sure all dads deal with. A lot of your college friends and your friends in your 20s and your high school buddies, you start to kind of lose some of that relationship. And it sounds like this is a relatively new group of friends that you built in your late 30s. Is that right?
Yeah, 1 year we came together. 1 year. And how it came together was Quincy was he turned to me, he was like, dude, I love some of these things that you're doing with like the exchange and some of the interviews you've done with like about connection and stuff. So, but I want to do my own kind of group, and I want to assemble just a group of guys who are all almost all dads, and uber go-getter type A'ers. And the first couple dinners was like, yeah, I think this will be cool. And then things started to get real. And they've been for me on my journey, like one thing I talk a lot about is like the power of currencies. And not knowing me, I grew up I fell into the social media and digital space, and I became known as like the guy for social media. And that all changed when I hit my rock bottom, where my currency then kind of became more of this culture fixer and this empathy and connection person. And so, it was actually the grade 8 that helped me realize that going from this to that is nearly impossible. And instead, you got to look more at the gray and set goals in that gray area. And that was a smack to the face. You know, I mean, it was hard for me. I heard it from some other people, and I was like, okay, now I get you. Okay. And we got to redirect ourselves and start, I think, bringing in more of that practical advice. I mean, at least the way I'm run, very emotional.
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing that is empowering for other guys to hear, is that you do have to put yourself out there, go to, meet new people and be open to criticism and maybe shed some of the bad influences in your life as you are. Because we do go through these kind of reinventions, rebirths, inflection points in our life. And you are going to be, like they say, the average of the 5 people around you. In your case,
Exactly.
the 8 people around you. And sometimes you got to swap out some of those 8, right?
100%. And, I think it's also understanding that relationships take time. And I think we do live in a society where we want quick fixes for everything. And what I found is, especially with even my relationship with Hank, it took a little while to understand each other. And now we're just cranking on what is a very, it's not a tit for tat scenario. I think a lot of guys find their relationships built on kind of a score system or tit for tat.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing in this is like, I don't want anything. Like, let's just help each other out.
Mm-hmm.
But, having the patience to see everything through and get to know each other, instead of just, thinking that all of a sudden you're going to show up to dinner and, cry and be vulnerable. And it's like, no, that's not reality, people. It's going to take time and a little bit of work on both ends. And sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes people are bad fits. So move on,
Yeah, you got to keep dating sometimes.
Totally.
I did want to touch on, if you're okay talking about it, you talked about quitting drinking. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of guys and dads, as we start having young kids and get into our 40s, struggle with, whether, the hangover is just not nearly as fun when you have a 4-year-old crawling in your bed.
Right.
Is there any advice you can give dads going through that, struggling with that decision, or maybe talk about, again, why it was so hard, part of that 70-30, and why it's been so beneficial for you?
Yeah, sure. So I think deep down, I always had almost like a jealousy of my friends that didn't drink. And, they'd go on we all go on these trips where you just end up coming back 10 times more tired than when you left. And that's your getaway from being a parent and a husband. And you come back, you got like these huge bags under your eyes and nothing good really happened. It's not like deeper connections were made. You just got wasted the whole weekend. And it was through also my identical twin brother, ended up quitting drinking way, like years ago. And I think I haven't drank in 3 years, I think. And so watching him go through that, and I always had kind of like this jealousy. And, for me, it wasn't until I hit that rock bottom, which manifested itself as kind of, panic attacks. And I'm a very upbeat person, and I was hitting these lows that I hadn't really seen before, or at least in many, 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 many years. And so I sought advice with some friends. And, as I took the time out from work and even being a dad and a husband, and was able to look at this soup, I would say like the broth of that soup was alcohol. It was beer. I mean, it's not like, also I would never get wasted. Like you would never see me out of my gourd. But there was this kind of moment where I'm like, you know what? I'm taking it out. And when I took it out, everything started to change. And it wasn't all of a sudden, but I was waking up clear headed. And I mean, I lost 2 ring sizes. Like in my ring. And it's not like I've ever been a big guy, but my whole body transformed. And, I will say, as more people kind of reach out to me and they're like, Chris, I was inspired. I've been inspired and I've wanted to not drink anymore. Can you tell me what works? I know for me, I'm like a black or white type guy. So I wasn't going to have one beer. Like, what's the point of having a beer? Like, I have a huge amount of respect for people that do that, but no, I'm going to pack on a buzz. So, for me, once again, it was kind of taking it all out, and it's I had to learn how to like socialize again. It's weird when you go into these social situations where you've spent your whole life with a social lubricant with alcohol. You got to relearn that stuff.
Yeah.
And now it's relearned 3 years later, and I find that like around 10:36 things get lame really quick. And it's, for whatever reason, it's right around like that 10:30, 11 time where it's like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And then I'm the first one up the next morning running or kiteboarding or whatever. And it's really not nearly as big of a deal as most people think. So, but it's such an important part of my own kind of evolution. And it has been that big of a deal in terms of the impact, positive impact, once I've taken it out.
Yeah, and I imagine you found some new fun hobbies to take the place of it. You're talking about other things you do to refuel. Tell us really quick, what in the world is kiteboarding, and are you flying through the sky on a kite? I've seen people try it. I never saw them get up though.
So yeah, I have you basically have a wakeboard type board on your feet, and then you have a kite, different sizes but big. It's anywhere from 15 square meters, almost like a parachute, down to 8 square meters, depending on the wind is. And then you have a harness, and it's attached to your harness with what is almost like a water skiing bar. And I am obsessed with it. So my goal is to kiteboard 40 times this year. 40 times, not 40 days. My wife would kill me, but like 40 different sessions. So, Hank, Peter, and Hank's actually just learning how to kiteboard. We were just down in Isla Morada, and then before that, Turks and Caicos. We do these trips where you can just bang out tons of rides. And I mean, you're also covering, when we were in Turks, Pete and I covered 120 miles in 3 days. And I mean, so you're cruising, but basically, you're hauling. You've probably seen it, any beach you go to with a little bit of wind. And you're like, what is that? That looks fun. And then when you start pulling the air, you can get 30. I mean, the pros are getting over 100 feet of air, which is crazy.
Does that hurt?
But yeah, that's my jam. What's that?
What's that like when you land from 100 feet in the air on a?
Well, I'm not going 100 feet. I mean, I'd say probably the highest I've gone is 20 something, and I've landed hard, and it's just like falling off a cliff or something from high up, and you just kind of get beat up.
Yeah, but you got the adrenaline.
Yeah, exactly. And so that to me is like that. I mean, that's my happy place. And for me, people ask me like my favorite, like, what's your ideal spot? And it's me kiteboarding. Like, in my mind, like, what's your ideal spot? It's me kiteboarding. I come back to the beach, and my wife and daughters are there, and I kind of hang out with them, and I give them big hugs, and I go kind of up to like the hotel or whatever it is, and I bang out a couple calls, and then I put some like, something on the grill, and that's my perfect day. Like, I do a little work, kiteboarding, connection with my family. Ideally, maybe there's some other guys around hanging out, but that's my happy spot.
That's a good day. My wife and I, when we were out with a couple, that's been our new question. Describe your perfect day. And there is some time with the kids for sure, but there's a lot of alone time. There's a lot of time with your spouse, or a little time with your spouse. But yeah, there is a lot of alone time. And I think that's an important part for dads, is to, not feel guilty and take that time, because you're going to come back refueled. Are these guys trips are going on, or are you taking the whole family?
No, a lot of guys trips. And that's new. That's brand new. And because I used to feel so guilty about it. But what's worse is when you're at home being a grumpopotamus and not contributing in the ways that you want to or need to. And it's not, once again, it helps when I'm not going on these trips and getting wasted the whole time. I'm going there and I'm usually coming back with a couple new business ideas or new clients for, 22 squared or something. Something great always comes out of it, while also refueling, which is that's as good as it gets.
Let's take a quick break for our dad tip of the week, brought to you by Kickstart Reading. Do you have kids between the ages of 3 and 6? I've got 2 boys, and when my older son was going into kindergarten, my wife and I quickly learned that we had no idea how to teach him how to read. We found Kickstart Reading and watched one 2-minute video together, and you could see his confidence take off. Bonus, I felt like Dad of the Year. Here's another dad talking about how Kickstart Reading is helping his boys learn how to read.
Hey there, this is Chris Heller, and I'm a big fan of Kickstart Reading. Each morning before school, I show a video to my 4.5-year-old son, and now his little 2-year-old brother is getting in on the action as well. I'm a big fan of the videos, highly consumable and engaging for young boys. Definite recommend for all parents out there who are looking to get their kids off to the right start with reading. Kickstart Reading.
Go to kickstartreading.com and use the code DAD to get 65% off right now. That's D-A-D, DAD. See? It works. kickstartreading.com. Now back to the show. Let's get back into dad life for a second. We'd
Sure.
like to do a dad tip. Chris, do you have a tip you can give other dads out there?
So one thing that we do, I think it's super important, especially when you have more than one kid, figure out scenarios where you can connect with the other one, because usually, or what I found with my friend group as well as personally, you end up gravitating either out of convenience or age. You end up gravitating where people, dad and mom, kind of pair up if you have 2 kids, or you kind of have these things. So create scenarios where you flip flop. And so, like, my daughter is my 9-year-old, who I drive her to school every day, and she's very emotional like me, and we just are always kind of attached at the hip. She goes riding every Saturday, and so my wife actually takes her to riding, and then I go off with Marlon and we go on adventures together. And I'm hoping that she's going to be my kiteboarder. But by kind of flip-flopping that, I think it's really important that you get more of those dynamics. The other thing, kind of dad tip that I've been doing that's super cool, is we're about a year into going to bed and doing mindfulness together. We use Calm, and it's a way that you can bond together, but also it helps. It's kind of 2 birds with 1 stone, where you can meditate as a father and son, or a father and daughter in my case.
Yeah, I like both of those tips. I do that occasionally with my kid when he can't sleep. I end up passed out on his floor while he's awake. But yeah, the switching on and off with the kids, my wife just actually, I think, planning that too. She just called me and said, "You got the basketball game with Cameron on Thursday, so I'm going to take Brooks to dinner, and on the other night, I'm going to take Cameron." And I think you can't always, you want to be spontaneous, but there is some planning that needs to go into it. So I think even
Totally.
just like 3 days, if you can figure out how you're going to get that quality time in, it's much less stressful for you and the kids.
Totally.
All right, Chris. Hold on, I got a little sound effect here for you.
Uh-oh.
Are you ready for some rapid fire questions, Chris Tuff?
Yeah, let's do it.
What was your first car?
It was a Pathfinder.
What is your favorite meal to eat for dinner?
In Atlanta, umi, when someone else is paying. At home, it would be probably steaks on my big green egg.
What is your favorite movie of all time? We'll start with drama.
Dead Poets Society.
How about a comedy?
Gosh, one of the Farley movies. Black Sheep, maybe. Like one of those guys.
Yes, he's the best.
Oh, so good.
What is your favorite live concert that you've ever seen?
Have you ever heard of the band The Samples out of Colorado, or Rogue Wave? And like, the Samples aren't big anymore, but Sean Kelly's still doing some stuff. Rogue Wave is probably my number one, and Band of Horses as well. That's up there.
Where'd you see them? Everywhere?
The Fox was the best that I've seen.
If you were a Major League Baseball player, what would be your at-bat song?
Oh, great question. It would be some sort of wussy indie rock, like probably the Shins or something, like just to change it up. And it's just like, it just takes me away.
That would
sad.
fire them up.
Not gonna get anyone fired up, but it'll get me fired up, and then everyone will fall asleep, and I'll use it to my advantage.
All right, Chris, I read that you owned a beeper at one time, where I think we're both part of the beeper generation. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, this is true. I would get beeped when I was over at my girlfriend's house to come home from my mom.
Yeah. Oh, you got the text beeping. I was going to ask you, what was your favorite number code to get beeped with?
Oh, it was only with my mom to get me to
Oh, all
call
right.
home. That was
Okay.
pretty much it.
All right.
Yeah.
I hope your mom wasn't texting you some of the things that I got. That's
No,
good.
I didn't get any of that. I never went through it. Like I skipped that whole stage for some reason. We went straight from beepers to cell phones. I had a British girlfriend at one time also, and I got my first text message. I was like, "Oh my gosh, what is this? These she's able to write with her phone?"
And last question, what is your favorite podcast to listen to right now?
Naval, How to Get Rich. It's actually it was through Peter Bolden and Hank McClarty and the Great Eight that I was exposed to Naval for the first time. Founder of Angel List, amazing entrepreneur, and he loved his podcast so much he had someone write all of his podcast down into a book, and he printed the book, and it says How to Get Rich on the front in like big white on black letters, which is super embarrassing to be seen reading that in public. So I took a Sharpie and I blanked out rich. So it just says how to. And Naval is my guy. And I agree with almost everything he has to say, except for his stuff around networking, which I'm not going to get into right now.
He is incredible. He's like Yoda with his wisdom, and it's all. So his podcast, is that where they do like the take his tweet storms and put it into audio?
Exactly.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Highly
Yeah, and if
recommend.
anyone listening, if you want to find it, just go to YouTube and do Naval How to Get Rich, and they compile all of his tweet storms. They're super short, but they compile it all into audio that's in that YouTube, and then it's actually written below it on that website. So check it out.
All right, great answers, Chris. Let's talk a little bit about your career. I read somewhere that you were a Don Draper in your former life, or maybe your current life.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the middle of the Don Draper. I sell, uh, as I've noticed in life, ever since the third grade. The only good thing I heard on my report card in third grade was Chris's enthusiasm is contagious, and my brother calls it my passion disorder. And my passions have evolved in life, from kind of the digital and social realm to now this, how do we create more empathy in the world? But that still puts me in this place where I'm always selling, whether I realize it or not. And what's cool about what's happening with the book is that my book is now opening up doors to Fortune 100 companies, where I'm doing these big speeches and engagements with them. And then after I create that relationship, the Don Draper kind of comes out and is like, well, it looks like you guys need help here, here, and here. I have an advertising agency that I'm a partner at. And so it kind of converts into that. So, yeah, so I guess I'm kind of playing a little of both right now. And it's pretty cool. I love it.
Do you ever imagine Mad Men is one of my favorites? Do you ever imagine what your life would have been like if you were alive and in the agency in the 60s?
I do. And I don't know how much different it would be.
I don't know if you
Like
could have given up drinking back then. It
I
seems pretty
know,
standard.
right? And John Hamm actually quit drinking a while ago, as well. I think he actually quit just before I did. But yeah, no, I think that would have been probably more difficult. Although I can't say it's very easy in our society either. Everyone
Yes.
drinks.
I did want to go back to one thing. You said you're one of six. Is that right?
Yes.
That's incredible. Brothers, sisters, everybody?
Yeah, so 5 boys, 1 girl, and I'm an identical twin, married to an identical twin. And my
Wow.
wife was an identical twin and a pro soccer player, and she kicks my ass at every sport pretty much, which is awesome. But yeah, so we're both identical twins. But yeah, youngest of 6 kids, bunch of overachievers, and an identical twin.
So youngest, you got a chip on your shoulder then when you're that young and you got all those brothers to compete with?
Yeah, but I mean, you get very competitive. My Enneagram, I'm a type 3, which is an achiever. And I think a lot of that is comprised from what is family systems theory, being the youngest of 6 kids, but then also an identical twin because you're just you're always competing.
Yeah.
And so the competitive side is, it can get a little dangerous with me. And that's why I got to counteract that a little with some of the mindfulness and taking a deep breath, let it happen versus make it happen is one of those balancing acts that I'm not very good at.
That's good. I think my 5-year-old has got some middle child syndrome, very competitive. I see it in sports and everything. So there's a lot of good outlets for it, but I do have to keep my eye on it. And it's good to see that competition can bear some fruit later in life.
Dude, I think it's one of the most important. I think it's a super important trait, and a great one. The key is resilience within that, right? So when you get beaten, do you bounce back or do you wallow in it?
Yeah, that's what we're working on now. We still get at 5. If you steal the ball from him, it's no fair. So we're working on that.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. Give him a couple years.
Yeah. So 6 kids. I wanted to ask you. I asked a lot of my guests. Is there one thing that you look back that you learned from your dad or your parents?
My dad actually has this thing that is super cool where, he was a turnaround CEO, and he's, international companies he ran, and he's a thing with all of his kids where, it was about 15 years ago, he announced at one of our family dinners, that he was going to take each one of us on a trip anywhere we want in the world. And it could be no more than 5 days. And we had to plan the whole thing. And the caveat was it needs to be in a country that he's never been and you've never been. And then you also, within 24 hours of returning, have to send an email to the rest of the family recollecting your trip. And then he does it and sends it at the exact same time. And so I just did mine. I just sold the rights of my book to a Portuguese publisher. And I'd heard so many great things of Lisbon. I was like, Dad, we're doing it. And so he went to Cuba with my brother, Iceland with my brother, Barcelona with my sister. I was like, we're going to Lisbon. And, what was so cool about that was, father-son relationships, I think, can oftentimes be very hard on us. And I've always, I think, struggled with his affirmation. I've always wanted more of that affirmation. He's British and not as emotional or at all. Like, I'm the exact opposite of him in that way. But, it was after that trip that he sent an email to everyone and was like, Chris is by far like one of the most enthusiastic, because he's exhausting because he never stops. And, to kind of hear his view of me, which I see all day, every day as I do what I do. But for him to finally see those things in me was kind of like a big moment. But the same is true of my view of him. And, it takes really getting away. And I encourage everyone to go take a trip with your dad and connect that way, regardless of what type of relationship you have. And it's actually kind of cool because within our grade 8, it's inspired a lot. Hank actually just brought his dad to the Auburn game with him last weekend when he was featured on the field. And a lot of people are starting to do these things, and they all come back with these amazing insights. But, I learned so much about him, and I see a lot more similarities than us, than I had before. And, really it comes down to, I have a huge appreciation for both his ethics, as well as his always putting the family first, which I aspire to do as well. So I would say those are big things. But everyone, take a trip with your dad before it's too late.
That's awesome. Yeah, it really is true, because don't you look at your dad completely different now that you have kids? Like, you always thought they should be perfect and everything, and now that you see yourself struggling with some of these things, and it's like, oh, I guess that's why I pissed you off that time.
Totally. Or the first time when they go and ask you for advice, it's like, whoa, wait, is this happening right now? You want my advice?
That's awesome.
Doesn't happen often, trust me, but it has.
Well, Chris, we only have a few more minutes, but I did want to get back to the Millennial Whisperer. So many great nuggets in there.
Sure.
Could you give maybe a quick tip to leaders that they can use even tomorrow when working with millennials or dealing with them?
Yeah, I mean, one of the greatest, I think takeaways is, create a system where people are appreciated. I think deep down, people just want to feel accepted and a part of something. And appreciation and rewards and recognition is absolutely essential to that. by the time that you're buying the kegs or the ping pong tables or building the new office like NCR just did here, it's too late. You're trying to alleviate a culture problem after it's a systemic issue. So the workshops that I've been doing, one of those key points is, one, create a top-down reward and recognition. And the first thing out of anything, it takes 1 minute of your time. When someone gets recognized on your team for doing a good job or by a client, just all you have to do is press forward, and you forward that to their boss's boss, and then you CC them and maybe some of the other team members, and you say, awesome job. Or just insert a GIF, like with a celebration GIF, right? For that's the single most effective use of your time to increasing morale and adding culture. The other side is just create a real connection with your people. And you don't have to wait for your one-on-ones to do this. Go up to your people, look them in the eyes and say, how are you doing today? Or ask them, what's driving you? What motivates you? And, I think it's through that relationship and that connection that you'll actually start seeing them come around, versus being, so I think business oriented, because it doesn't work that way, and so, yeah, those are two, I think, easy tactical things people can start putting into place that would have a huge impact.
Yeah, I like that tip. I mean, 10 seconds for you to forward an email and write literally 2 words. It's almost more powerful when it's got like 3 words in an email too.
Totally.
So yeah,
totally.
I'm gonna use that one on my wife.
Yeah.
Wife today. And
Yeah,
I even
there you
you gave a couple quick tips that I read about you gave a great speech, but you could have worked on this. You said change the but to an and.
Yeah.
And I liked your other one about we should grab coffee sometime, and you like to
turn
add
let's into buy when.
Yeah. So what is that one?
So, the build a better sandwich is your people want instant feedback. So don't wait until the review to give it. And they're actually much more open to some of the critical pieces, but go in with a compliment and don't say but. So let's just say it's the podcast. Hey, Chris, great job on the podcast. Way to push yourself out element. Don't say but, use and there's a couple of things I think you can do a little better. I counted how many times you used fillers. You said 32 times, and you said like 57 times. So definitely look at improving that in the future, and just be aware of that. And by the way, seriously, great job. Way to push yourself out there. You're already above and beyond a lot of your peers because you're actually doing it. So that's the feedback piece. The other piece of that is this idea of turn let's into buy when. And I think we live in a very unaccountable culture. I think we all like to talk a big game and then we don't walk the walk. So there's no worse email or no worse interaction than you saying in a social setting, let's grab a drink or let's grab dinner, and then nothing happens. So in the future, just respond immediately with buy when, and it brings instant accountability. And you'll find yourself actually changing. And it's been a life-changing thing for me because I live it to a T. But those coffees and those lunches actually happen when you answer the let's grab coffee, and you immediately say, okay, by when? Next week? Let's pull out your calendar. And I mean, look, I think that's probably what ended up spurring this podcast now is we said, okay, by when do you want me to go on your podcast? That's awesome. Let's do this thing.
I love it. Chris, so many nuggets in here. Thank you so much for being on the Dad the Best I Can podcast. Where can people learn more about what you're up to?
Sure. So if you want to connect with me, the best way to connect with me is surprisingly on Instagram. It's Tuff22, TUFF22. And just send me a message and I'll hit you up there. And then if you want to get a copy of the book, get it off Amazon. It's cheap. It's like $10. I don't make any money off of them. But I think I get it like $1 each maybe, but go to Amazon, The Millennial Whisperer. And you can also go to themillennialwhisperer.com. That's 2 L's, 2 N's. And there you can take a self-assessment as well as download the first chapter of the book if you want that. If anyone listening can't afford the book, hit me up. I'll send you a free copy. I've given away like 7,000 copies, so I can also do that. So check it out, and lots of great things happening.
Love it. Thanks, Chris. I got to go run, catch the kids on the bus. We'll talk soon.
Rock and roll. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys for listening to the Dad the Best I Can show. Go take 5 seconds, hop on over to dadthebestican.com and sign up with your email to get weekly updates, dad tips in your mailbox. Get your questions answered on the show. That's dadthebestican.com. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Actually, 5 stars, we could do better than that. Brooks? Infinity stars. Cameron, how many stars?
Infinity 1,000.
Infinity 1,000. You gotta one-up them in this household. Thanks. See ya.